Today I talk with Jonny Longden from Journey Further about embedding experimentation into Agile product development. My name is Guido Jansen and welcome to Zero Café, the award-winning podcast where I show you the behind the scenes of large and small optimization and growth teams and talk with their specialists about data and human-driven optimization. My goal with the Zero Café podcast is to make websites and the lives of optimization specialists a lot better. And we're doing this by spreading a mindset of experimentation and validation. You are a vital part in reaching this goal, and one important way for you to help is by sharing relevant episodes with your colleagues. And if you yourself are not subscribed yet, make sure you are by checking this in your podcast app. It really means a lot and your actions do make a difference. So thank you for doing this. In case you missed the previous episode, last week I spoke with Sumantha Shankaranarayana, Senior Conversion Rate Optimization Manager at Kaspersky Labs, and we learned how Kaspersky approaches and combines Zero for B2B and B2C, and how being a movie critic might make you a really great Zero specialist. You can listen to that episode on www.zero.cafe or in the podcast app that you're listening with right now. This episode of Zero Café is made possible by our partners Online Dialogue, SiteSpect, Online Influence, Content Square and Convert.com. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 45. Jonny, welcome to the Zero Café podcast. And to kick things off, I'd love to know a bit more about your background and how you actually got started in Zero.
Sure. So I started my career in I guess what now would be called data science, but we didn't call it that then. It was just called analytics. So I worked in sort of direct marketing and CRM, and then became a kind of a consultant, really helping people with things like segmentation and propensity modeling and spatial analytics and things like that. And then I was working for an agency that did a bit of both of that sort of offline stuff and digital. Mm-hmm. And this was in about 2007 or something like that, and I sort of just got exposed to this sort of world of digital analytics, and and conversion optimization wasn't really a thing then. It was like A/B testing tools were just about emerging, and I just became fascinated in that. But particularly, I saw that most of the people that were doing that sort of stuff had no actual experience in analytics. So I thought it must be quite beneficial to take that real experience of analytics and put it with that. So that's why I kind of crossed over into digital, and that was a successful thing. That kind of got me, quite a lot further than most of the people doing it at the time. I then ran analytics and conversion agency teams in a couple of agencies for about 7 or 8 years. Most of that time was with a big global agency called RGA that I had headquartered out of New York, and they're kind of an innovation consultancy, really. So whilst running a team, I then ended up becoming more of a management consultant. So I would fly around the world and help big organizations with their sort of internal setup for analytics and conversion. So people like Nike, this big Russian retailer called Video, Manchester United, a few other companies like that. And then I had a baby, so I just couldn't do the travel anymore. So I wanted to go client side. So I did a stint at Visa working on their version of PayPal called Visa Checkout. Mm-hmm. And then went to work for Sky. And Sky is sort of probably the most interesting part of my story, I guess. So Sky, before I worked there, had real sort of fragmented different digital teams in different parts of the business. And for efficiency reasons, they wanted to put it all together into a centre of excellence in Leeds. And I was hired right at the start of that process. With quite a broad remit, really, just about how do you make that sort of a thing commercially beneficial, and how do you make sure it has good commercial impact. And because of my background, my answer to that question is experimentation. So I built a big experimentation function there. The really interesting part about it was because we were building this centre of excellence, there was nothing legacy to deal with. We were literally building everything from scratch, including all the ways of working for developers and the Agile methodologies and everything from scratch. So it was a really interesting, great opportunity just to go, right, what's the perfect way that this should work, and set it up right from the beginning. And that's what we did. And so that's still running a lot like that now, even though I'm not there. that's incidentally where I learned a hell of a lot about what we're going to talk about today, which is, how do you properly integrate experimentation with Agile, and I learned that the hard way in some ways.
Yeah, and Sky keeps popping up as positive examples of how to do Zero. A lot of people from Sky I see popping around and talking about it on conferences.
Yeah, I bought Optimizely whilst I was there for Sky, and they're a big advocate of what we built at Sky and how that works, and from a process point of view how it works with Agile and stuff. Particularly because most of our testing was server-side testing as well, so we had the developers really heavily involved in that using full stack and things like that.
Yeah, and Optimizely now being bought by Episerver. What was your first reaction to that?
Because now I run a consultancy and we work with smaller clients. We don't actually have any clients that have Optimizely because it's so expensive. Yeah. And so I'm a bit removed from it really as a thing. So I don't know. I thought it was a bit odd. This is it's not the most obvious connection that you would make, but other than that, I don't know. I don't know much about the acquisition and what it will mean or anything like that. So certainly, I have heard some grumblings from people that they believe it will change things and stuff like that, but I don't know that much about it really.
Yeah, I've spoken to a couple of people that almost no one saw this coming. That's basically the main trend.
Yeah,
and. We'll see what this brings, if it will remove Optimizely from the basically the open market as a free service, or if it's going to be connected to Episerver alone. We'll have to see. I actually have a scheduled podcast with the CEO from Episerver, Alex Atzberger. So I'm going to ask him.
Yeah.
So this is just an introduction how you got started with Zero. Why are you still in Zero?
Yeah, well, I just generally have this real passion about the whole thing, like I always have. And part of that's fueled by the fact that I honestly think that not very many people do it right at all. Yeah. And there's a whole range of what you mean when you say CRO, like a really big spectrum. And you have at the bottom end of the scale companies who, they've literally got somebody in the marketing team who very occasionally runs an A/B test in Google Optimize or something like that. And they can genuinely believe that they do CRO by doing that. And then at the opposite end of the scale, you've got Sky all the way up to Booking.com and all the other big guys that people talk about when they talk about experimentation. And there's a whole range in between that. But the vast majority of people are sort of at the bottom end of that scale and don't realize it. And that's just it's really interesting for me. It's something that I want to try and change. I want to try and open people's eyes to the fact that there's a better way to do it and that it has such enormous benefit as well. When you do it right and you get the right process behind it, it just can't not have a really, really massive impact and a really beneficial impact. And so that's actually really what drove me to start Journey Further Conversion, because I just want to kind of go out there and open people's eyes to it and get them to understand it. But at the end of the day, I don't know, to really answer your question, it's just, and I'm sure a lot of people in CRO are the same. It's just there's something really, really exciting about running tests and about running experiments and proving things, and particularly not proving things as well, because one of the things that I always tell people is the only really true thing about CRO is that you can't really guess what's going to work. You can't really you can't really sort of second guess things and have best practices, because at the end of the day, things that seem really obvious will fail, and things that seem really stupid will win. And that is really fascinating, and trying to understand why those things are like that, and also exposing your own cognitive bias and things like that is just really interesting and exciting. So
for over 10 years now, Online Dialogue advises about evidence-based conversion optimization with a focus on data and psychology. We see that analyzing data and recognizing customer behavior results in a better online dialogue with your clients and a higher ROI. The team of strategists, analysts, psychologists, and UX specialists gathers valuable insights in the online behavior of your visitors, and together with you, they optimize the different elements of your CRO program through redesign, expert reviews, A/B test, and behavioral analysis. For more information about their services, go to onlinedialogue.com. What do you say to when you encounter a client or prospect that comes to you for help, and they do this, like you said, the marketing department very distributed, and they a couple of times a year they run an A/B test, and they think, okay, we do CRO already. What do you tell them? What's CRO really about?
Yeah, so the really interesting stat that I very often start with is from Optimizely actually did this study. So, and you may know of it. They gave virtually, I think, all of their historical data from the whole platform to Stefan Tomke at Harvard Business School, and he was running research on all sorts of different nuances of statistics and things like that. But the overarching thing that he came out with, which he mentions in his book, is that only 1 in 10 of all of those tests historically that have ever been run on the platform came out with a positive result. And, another way to look at that. So, if you're an e-commerce director or any kind of website owner or whatever, the other way to look at that is that everything that you do to your website, no matter how big or small, you're making content changes, you're putting things through your dev agency, and if you're not testing any of those things, then there's a really good chance that 9 out of 10 of those things is a waste of money or a waste of time, or even worse, is damaging your revenue. Yeah. And that's what I try and get people to realize, first of all, is just by showing examples of things where where it seemed like a no-brainer. It seemed like something that, you couldn't possibly not do, that actually turned out to be detrimental. Then they start to get it, and they start to realize, actually, everything you do to your outward-facing website is a risk. Yeah. And then, so CRO, which, as we all know, is not a great term for what we actually do. But CRO is really kind of risk management. That is what it is. You are basically making sure that what you invest in web development in is commercially beneficial and commercially impactful, and not a waste of money. So, there's a whole way of also articulating the economics behind it, of how, what you're effectively doing is number one, you're not doing things that don't work, but as well as saving the, damage to your conversion rate and revenue and profit and everything that goes along with that, you're also not spending the money in production web development to develop those things. So, there's a whole sort of virtuous circle behind it. And even if you spend money on CRO in done properly, that should basically almost just displace what you would have spent in production web development on things that you're not, that aren't going to work. So It's not really a new cost. It's just a more efficient version of web development and a less risky version of web development in a way.
And it's probably easier to validate things through CRO, because you don't necessarily have to develop the whole product.
Absolutely,
or whole functionality, just to validate it.
Yeah, and that is it. And often an objection would be, well, there's just some big things that we know we need to do, and we can't really test them because they're too big. Like we need to implement PayPal, or we need to redesign the checkout or whatever. And from there you can sort of say, well, why do you need to do that? What makes you think you need to do that? How do you know? And often, redesigning a checkout, they're like, well, it's just, we haven't done it for a long time, and nobody likes it. And it's like, well, who doesn't like it? You don't like it. Well, maybe your customers like it. So you got to go back to, really, you start with research, you then start testing small things, and again, a lot of people would test small things and then just implement them or not and move on. But the whole point should be that you're building up this sort of ladder of learning. You test small things. If a small thing works, then that should give you an indication that gives you the license to do a slightly bigger thing along the same theme, because you've proven that there's a point in investing a little bit more time and effort in doing that. And, eventually you might get to a fairly big project, which you're doing in production web development, and then you would feature test it before actually releasing it, just to make sure or to refine it. But by the time you've got to do that, you should have proven that there's a point in doing that piece of work in the first place. And that, to me, is what experimentation is. It's, conversely to CRO, which a lot of people use as like, let's hack these few things on the front end just to try and trick a bit more revenue out of the website. Really experimentation done properly is a sort of a canon of going from research to learning to the development of that learning to ultimately doing bigger things and bolder bits of innovation, which ultimately costs money. But that's the point: is you have de-risked that money that you're spending.
Yeah, framing it as risk management makes a lot of sense. I think we did an episode about specifically that with Stephen Pavlovich. Mm-hmm. I'll link to that in the show notes. And it wouldn't be the first time I get to a client and they actually, because the term experimentation for some people has the connotation of actually being something that's very risky.
Yeah.
Well, actually, it's the opposite. At least the way that we do it with CRO.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think actually the 1 in 10 that you mentioned from the Stephen Tompkins research, I think that might be actually there might be positive bias in there still, because those are experiments that people consciously
of course
create
yeah.
in those systems. So it might be 1 in 10 might be even on the positive side for the effect that all your changes have.
Yeah, because you've got to think as well, like all those companies, they'd bought Optimizely. So not only are they doing testing, they must be reasonably serious about it because they've got Optimizely, So yeah, and that means that they're probably putting a reasonable amount of research and data behind those tests. So absolutely, that could be positive or too positive even. But the other thing, like I don't know, ultimately we're trying to persuade somebody like an e-commerce director or somebody relatively senior, to consider this and to consider, the transformation that goes with doing it properly. Yeah. And I find the challenge is often that those kind of people, they have at some point sort of box ticked CRO by the fact that they've got, somebody over there that does that, or an agency that's doing a bit of that for them or something like that. And it's almost a kind of like, you might have like a balance sheet where they've got annual budgets and they've got PPC, SEO, CRO. And by that fact, they think that they are doing CRO. And just back to what I was saying originally, there's so many different things that CRO can mean, but the part of the challenge is that they will think, well, we've got a CRO person, we've even got like a little CRO team, so we've got it covered. That's absolutely fine. We're doing it. And yet, what you're trying to get them to realize is that it isn't a tactic that should sit alongside PPC and SEO. It's a whole way of life around how you do web development, or even marketing as well in a way. But that's the difference where, you're trying to get people to say, and I'll say like, so you've got your CRO, what's in your roadmap for web development and where did that stuff come from? Because that's the thing, they'll find, well, we've got this roadmap for web development and there's a whole load of stuff in there. We did a strategy presentation at the beginning of the year and we've got redesigning the checkout and we've got, new payment methods and we've got, tech debt and all this kind of stuff in the roadmap. And then there's also a few little things that came out of the CRO team. And you're like, well, if what you mean by CRO, if you take away the term, what it really is simply using research and data to understand what you should do to your website and experimenting to validate whether you really should or not. That's all it is. So why would you do anything other than that? Why have you got some stuff here in this roadmap that isn't that, and then a little bit of stuff that is that? That's what you're trying to get people to understand. It's really, you go, to somebody at that level, you have to go back to the economics of it and say, you effectively doing this stuff, investing in web development, either with an internal team or an agency, and you have no real idea whether that stuff is going to work. So, you're putting a massive risk on that investment by guessing and even though, like they might not feel like it's guessing because, they did all this work that said we need a new checkout. Well,
Well, the competitor is doing it, so it's not guessing.
Yeah. It's like our checkout doesn't look like John Lewis's checkout, so we need it to.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly. And so you just mentioned already that there's you can apply this to product but also marketing. How would you see it? Because today we're talking about how to embed this experimentation way of working into agile product development. How do you see this experimentation applied to marketing versus product?
Yeah, I think I think that all comes down to the process that you have, and what we talk about, and what I know a lot of other people talk about as the sort of operating system for experimentation, which is really the systematization of how you go from research and data that understands customer problems and opportunities and things like that to ideas to experimentation. And in that sense, experimentation is really a word for validation. And so if you take it to a slightly higher level where you're simply, managing the process of research, data and insight, then managing the process of ideation and prioritization of ideas and what you should be doing, and then doing some kind of validation in order to ensure that those ideas are really the right ideas before you actually push them out into the real world, then that doesn't have to necessarily relate just to website content. That can be, marketing. It could be, PPC, messaging, testing, or all sorts of things. And I mean, in a lot of those channels, you can do experimentation in the same way. So I don't really see that, you need to necessarily limit it just to website content, although of course that's where it is traditionally most used.
Yeah.
Out of interest, like after I worked at Sky, I then went to be the e-commerce director of a hotel company, a fairly large hotel company in the UK. And what attracted me to that role was that really was like an experiment, it's an experimental job. Like, what happens if I take this stuff and this way of working that I've built at Sky and apply it to everything? Because I ran the P&L for not just the website, but all of the marketing and distribution as well. And so I used the same process and used the same system that I developed for everything, and it worked really, really well. And that's now what we effectively sort of sell and help other people with at Journey Further. But yeah, it doesn't. I think if you get hung up on the idea of an A/B test and all the statistical significance and things like that, which absolutely you should do where you can, then it precludes you from doing other kinds of validation, where that's really what it is you're doing. You're validating ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think it makes sense that you start doing this on your own marketing channels. I mean, that's where you probably have the most traffic, and in terms of CRO, if that includes A/B testing, that's where you have a lot of data. But of course, those principles, you can apply them to email, SEO, SEA, product, all your marketing channels. It's not exclusive for digital, for your own website.
Yeah, and also if you have a really good, well articulated sort of strategy for what performance means, like how you basically kind of chunk out performance into the different levers that you can pull in order to drive profitability for your business, then that will naturally cascade down into the different things that you do, into the different traffic drivers, different parts of conversion and things like that. Even if you're an e-commerce business, into things like the distribution chain, or returns and stuff like that. So if you can articulate things really well like that, then you've got a really good holistic view of what the business looks like in terms of what you can do to affect it. Then optimization in that in that pure sense of the word means you're going to try and optimize all those different things, and then again going back to that idea that optimization or experimentation is just using research and data to understand where the opportunities are, and some sort of validation to make sure that you're taking your own cognitive bias out of the equation. Yeah. Then you should be able to do that for everything.
Yeah, and the validation doesn't need to be an A/B test, right?
Absolutely,
that's often something that People use as a counter. Oh, we cannot do zero because we don't have the traffic. We're business to business. We cannot do. We don't have the traffic to do A/B testing, and thus we cannot do zero.
Yeah, and of course, and that's not true. That's never true, really. Like you absolutely can do A/B testing. You just have to understand the statistics of it. You have to understand the statistics well enough to know that there is a place where you can accept much lower levels of significance than 95%, as long as you using sample sizes in the right way and things like that, and testing on upstream metrics rather than eventual conversion and all that sort of stuff. You absolutely can do it, but even if it gets to the level where it's really, really imperfect, it's still better than not doing it. It's still always slightly better than not bothering and just guessing. And again, the whole point is that you start learning, and you might run these tests that maybe they're not perfect statistically, but you will learn from the data that you get off the back of it and the post-test research and all that sort of stuff. So,
and assuming your company grows and your marketing channels grow, you will be very good in your preparation for when the time comes, and you can run those tests.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or bigger test, or more test.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we're here to talk about specifically your article about embedding experimentation. So first off, let's ask the question. I mean, this is probably so embedding it in an organization or embedding it into your agile product development is probably in contrast to having it as a standalone team.
Yeah.
So what are the differences there? Why should you go for embedding it in your whole process?
Well, just before we get onto that, there's a couple of things really. So what I mean when I talk about embedding it is at a simpler level than thinking about agile and sort of organizational structures and things like that, is simply having a really properly defined process for how you get something from experimentation into production development. And where that comes from is we come across this a lot with clients that we have, where somebody there may be sort of a CRO internal person or an agency or something like that, and they're running tests, and some of those will win, and then they're effectively saying this is one, you should push this live. And what you find a lot of the time is that stuff can just sort of linger and not actually ever really get produced, and that's why you get this thing where you have people who just have tons and tons of tests running at 100% in their A/B testing platforms, because they can't really get those tests pushed live. And you've got to think, why is that? Why can you not do that? And it's because of some sort of disconnect between the way that sort of production web development operation and ultimately queue and prioritization is run, and what those tests are. And for example, there are things like a lot of the time the output of an A/B test is quite a simple change, and developers a lot of the time don't really like to work on small things. You can have an internal dev team, and those developers may just naturally sort of gravitate towards bigger, more interesting projects that are in, particularly that involve them working in new and different code bases like React and things like that. Or
give me a new framework and I'll
exactly.
I'll spend a couple of weeks.
So there's things like that can mean that here's a simple test that is just a content change to a page, I need it pushing live. How that can just kind of linger. Similarly, there are things like the sort of hippo effect, where you might have senior people just sort of saying, right, I need this doing now, and these are kind of bigger things, and those things will churn around the top of that dev queue. And so the CRO team are not really getting any traction because they're not seen as having the authority to actually dictate what should go through the production web development queue. And there's a ton of other things like that where it's very easy to overlook those things and just to then end up sort of, for a CRO team or a CRO person, just be, kind of, as I say, leaving everything at 100% because they can't really do anything else. So that's sort of like the simple thing is that, you people just need to think about that, to think about what is the process.
I had this with a company, very recognizable, that all these changes that we suggested that came from research and A/B test were all added to the bottom of the queue for the development. Never really got to the top. And after a couple of months of implementing nothing, suddenly conversion went down because they changed the whole pricing model of the website. Of their service, which obviously had nothing to do with the usability of the website or whatever, but they looked at us, so, hey guys, CROs, the conversion is going down. What should we do? Well, we have this whole list of currently 50 items that you haven't implemented yet, all improvements of the website. Let's do that. So they picked up all these items in one 2-week sprint. And I think conversion jumped from, so there were a price comparison website. I think the conversion was, before that was like 32-ish% clickouts. And after implementing those 50 changes, they were up to 43.
Yeah.
Which is a massive difference.
Yeah.
All small changes.
Yeah, and it all adds up though, doesn't it? So
yeah.
But with Agile particularly, as well, just on a sort of a bigger level than what I was just talking about, the thing with Agile is that, in a company like Sky, you've got, very, very big team of developers split into different sort of squads and tribes and all this kind of stuff. And really, the one of the original concepts of Agile, based on the manifesto, is that it's about those sort of little groups of people working as a sort of an autonomous unit and being responsible for that product or area of the website or whatever, and having a level of autonomous control over it. And if it's going to work the way it's really supposed to work, that autonomous unit should be feeding directly from customer insight and customer data and adapting the product accordingly. And that's how it's meant to work, right? I mean, it doesn't always work like that. Like, when people say they've got Agile, it really often isn't like that. It's a way for seemingly people more senior to get things done faster than they would have otherwise done. However, that is how it's supposed to work. So, that in itself should inherently be experimental, because if the idea is you've got this, this product team, product squad in an Agile environment, and, that part of the manifesto that says iterative customer collaboration means that you should be listening to customers and constantly feeding from customer data to understand what the improvements are that should be made. Well, that is research and analytics. That is customer research and analytics. And then, the other parts of Agile, which are about MVP and all that sort of stuff, is ultimately about de-risking what's happening through gradually developing features in a way that they can be iteratively tested and developed in an iterative manner. And that's experimentation. So really, if you really purely look at the Agile manifesto, then Agile and experimentation are the same thing. Effectively, that is what it's supposed to be about. So for that reason, you almost shouldn't. If you just look at it on a very, very pure way, you shouldn't really need to embed experimentation into it, because it already is, or it already should be that.
So is it mainly a branding problem that we have as CROs?
I think it's the 100% is a branding problem, but I think it's more that. Agile isn't, and hardly ever is, implemented in the way that it was probably originally intended. It's very often just simply seen as a way of working for developers. If you think that pure way it's meant to work is you've got this autonomous team that are constantly feeding off customer data and developing things, well, that's not really how it works. You've got a little squad of developers and they get given stuff to do by ultimately a business owner via a product owner, and that stuff gets prioritized according to who shouts the loudest and things like that in the organization. And none of it would ever really get tested because somebody's said do it. So
whether we test it or not, it has to be done anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So and in that respect, the Agile team will be disassociated from the responsibility of whatever it is that they're producing. So it's an Agile team in an engineering department that is delivering stuff that they're told to by the marketing team or by the the sales team or whatever. And so they're almost like a kind of a little internal agency that is just funded by somebody else to do stuff. And in that
which is often very demotivating, right, for those people?
Absolutely, yeah. Especially when they, I think, are acutely aware of the way Agile is meant to work. And so you've got this sort of world where it's a little bit like a company using an external dev agency, where that dev agency will not typically challenge what it is that they're asked to do. They'll just do it. And then and also, why would you then, as that engineering team, want to test those things? Because you're not responsible for the commercial output of them. And so that's where it all kind of goes astray, really. Just back to your very original question, like when I actually talk about embedding experimentation to Agile, it comes from that place where, most people have probably got a CRO team over here, and then, Agile developers or an external agency even. And just back to what I was saying before, here's this big list of stuff that they're working on, and then here's CRO over here. And really, like, what it should be about is like I say, just stripping away the concept of CRO temporarily and saying, right, what is going on here is you've got research and analysis and data that should be telling us the kinds of stuff that we should be doing, and a process of testing and learning that basically de-risks what we're actually doing. And so when I talk about embedding it in that level, it's just bringing those things together. If you've got a CRO team over there and you've got engineers over there, you've got what you need. You just haven't put them together in the right way. So you've got the expertise at data analytics and user testing and research and things like that. You've then got the expertise at how to form that into ideas and prioritize ideas and all that sort of stuff. And you've got the developers to help execute it. You just haven't brought them together in the right way.
So if that's a situation that you encounter at a prospect or new client, where do you start?
I think it's just, so we generally tend to kind of start out with what I was saying at the beginning around like the economics of it. Like, you try and get people to understand the economics of it and the fact that they are doing things to the website, that even though they seem like no-brainers, could be having a detrimental effect. And then the other thing I really try and get across to people is that it's not actually that difficult. Like, I think, you have conversations around this sort of stuff with people, senior people in businesses, and their minds sort of saying to them, transformation project, and it sounds really complicated, and business transformation, and we're gonna have to get McKinsey in or something, and it isn't really that hard. It's just about, at the end of the day, when you really, really strip it down to what it is better prioritizing the queue of stuff going into web development. That's literally it. Like, you've got a queue of stuff. You've got Jira with a big list of stuff in that that the engineers are going to work through. What is the best way to A, put stuff into that list, and B, organize that list so that they are working on it in the right way and giving it the best commercial output. And that is ultimately all it is, right? That is what it is. That's the absolute output of experimentation. And so get them to see that, it all becomes a little bit more simple. And then, the idea of just reorganizing people and things like that gets a bit easier. But, then you've got kind of questions of like, what's the right model for it? Do you try and sort of democratize it and get product teams actually running experiments, or do you have a small team that is, running experimentation for them? That's where I come back to this idea of properly embedding experimentation, which is in a way what we managed to do at Sky to an extent, which is that you really, going back to that idea of what Agile is, you should have a conversion or optimization or experimentation kind of consultant, or whatever you want to call them, that is aligned to each different product area, and their responsibility is ultimately feeding research, analysis and ideas into the product team, and to an extent alongside the product owner, managing the process of experimentation and what gets built and how it gets experimented on, and how you go from sort of small test to big test and stuff like that. And that is their role within that team. And if all of those different consultants are actually literally together a team under some sort of general line management, or they are just a virtual team, depending on what the reporting structures are, then they can all work together to ensure the development of that function, of that concept in the business. Now, I think that's really important because, again, going back to that idea of Agile being sort of autonomous units, I don't think generally people working in a proper Agile way like outside input if they can help it, because that is really what Agile is supposed to be. It's supposed to be they're responsible for that, and if you're able to put that within the squad and to make it a part of the squad and to involve everybody in it, so that literally at daily stand-ups they're discussing the experimentation process and discussing what gets tested on and all this kind of stuff, then that to me works much better and gets much better output. And I think not doing that, you would find a fair amount of resistance if it's just somebody over in that BI team, like over there, who does experimentation, is kind of telling us what we should test on and stuff like that. Then you get a lot more resistance to it for that. So
I usually see in a CRO specialist also, or the CRO team, as the body that advises the product manager on what to do, but it's still the product manager's choice if they're going to implement it or not, because it's not the CRO team. We cannot necessarily see the whole impact of implementing something and all the business impacts of that. I mean, the development or the logistics on creating something, we can say, okay, this is the impact it will have on your users. But then it's still going to be up to the product owner to decide, okay, does it make business sense to do it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like the other interesting part is, like, you got on one end of the scale, if you have a CRO team that have too much responsibility for actually executing every single part of the process, then they become a real bottleneck. So if every sort of product manager or product owner has to sort of go and say, right, we want to test this now, and can you develop this test, and and it's going through a bottleneck, then it becomes a bottleneck. But the absolute opposite of that is you just give testing capabilities to every different product team and allow everybody to test everything. Then that's completely anarchic, and you've got people running tests who aren't really that skilled in things like how to measure them and all that sort of stuff. So the sweet spot is somewhere in the middle, which is you might have a little center of excellence, or somebody at least who is responsible for really developing things like ways of measuring and processes that can be shared around other sort of teams. And then you've got, like I say, that sort of federated view where you've got individual people who are aligned to those different squads who are, helping that process and helping each squad run their tests. Then you've kind of got the best of both worlds. I mean, that's, highly dependent on the organization itself and the way it's structured and what's right for it. But I think that's ultimately the goal with that sort of embedded view, is that you've got that balance between having experts, having having real experts who are, like maybe, just sort of simply championing the whole thing, to expertise in each squad that's actually helping deliver it. And then ultimately you are really empowering the Agile squads and the engineers to really ultimately sort of deliver against it.
Marketing budgets have suffered, and the share for A/B testing has been impacted too. If you want to keep testing to enterprise standards but save 80% on your annual contract, you can consider Convert.com. With their summer release, you can take advantage of full stack and hybrid features, strong privacy compliance, no blink, and enterprise-grade security. Feel good about your smart business decision. Invest what you save back in your CRO program. Check out www.convert.com/2020. Besides the mindset that people have, and of course they're used to a way of working that might not be completely agile. What do you see are the biggest bottlenecks to achieving this for companies?
Yeah, I think, well, like I say, I think just a fear of the complexity of change. So, and I get that, like in big organizations, kind of changing things and restructuring things can seem really, really complicated. But, if you really break it down, it doesn't have to be that difficult, really. I think the other one is just, it's an unknown, and just like I was saying earlier on, like I kind of have this mission to try and sort of open people's eyes to the fact that this can be like a way, way better way of working that can drive like a massive amount of innovation. But I think, there's a lot of cases where, like, just like I say, people don't know that that's even a potential. Like, it just wouldn't cross their mind. It's not like they sort of think, I wish we were like Booking.com and all that kind of stuff. They're just not even that really aware of it at all as a thing. So I think, you've got to kind of show people that it is a possibility before they can even start to think about how the change might happen. And then, the other big thing is just sort of different bits of cultural resistance to it. And just like I say, that can ultimately boil down to different sort of political ways of working within the organization, different things about responsibilities and stuff like that, where, who feels like they own what, and, how do you then, introduce something new to that? And, you've got to think about all that. But, it gets harder as the organization gets bigger. But, I think really the way I often advise people to start out with this is to start testing things, and particularly to start trying to test really sort of contentious things. So, if you can find two senior people arguing about the design of a page or something like that and test it, then it's like
you already know they care about it.
Yeah, well, and also one of them will be annoyed by the result, but it just massively raises the profile of experimentation. Yeah. It just, like the more you can get people involved in things, and even if the one that it doesn't win, you can then show, well, here's all this data that we got off the back of it, and there is some legs in your idea if you do it this slightly different way, and so you can kind of show the process of how that sort of learning aspect of it works. Then that, I think, is how you just start to chip away and get people interested.
You need to stay away from making it personal. I think it shouldn't be a personal attack on someone. Oh, you got it wrong.
Yeah.
You have the wrong ideas about this. You should probably stay away from that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can. I mean that is, well, that's the other interesting thing about it. Like that can only be a problem if people have that sort of cultural fear of failure.
Which often is the case, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, if you say to I don't know, a marketer, or that their campaign was unsuccessful, or to the designer that their design didn't work, that often feels like a personal attack, and people might choke on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in a lot of businesses, the whole the whole sort of hierarchical nature of business itself, like, really sort of leads people to think, well, I've been hired into this really senior position. I've been hired because of my expertise, and I've got to demonstrate my expertise and my ability to come up with ideas. And if those ideas are sort of proven to not work through a test, then that doesn't look good. But again, like, that's why, as with any kind of experimentation, the most important thing is the post research that you do afterwards, because what you can learn, like from even something that loses, can have such a massive dramatic impact, like on something going forward. So that's the most important thing to try and get across, is that it's not a test that doesn't win. It's not a failure. It's a very, very important piece of data and will lead to something successful. So therefore, in a way, that idea was a good idea. It always is a good idea, because you're going to learn something from it. So.
You just mentioned resources. Assuming like an average mid-sized company, what kind of resources do they need? What would the team look like if you have a free hand in combining a team? What skill sets need to be there to have this in a proper agile way, in a way that they can really make some difference?
I usually sort of present it in sort of 3 chunks, really, and maybe 4, but like I kind of think of it as 3 broad areas, which is research and analytics, design and creative, and development, basically. And there are, you can map out a whole set of different skill sets in each of those 3 broad categories that you need for any CRO function to develop. But that doesn't sort of necessarily say where those skills should sit. And in a really small company, they could, you could try your best to find one person who can do all of them. But in a bigger company, there might be skills that are distributed across different teams that all need to come together in different ways. So, in research and analytics, you've got digital analytics, you've got, you might need like sort of more traditional offline data analytics for CRM data and stuff like that. There's user psychology, user research. You can go through all these different sorts of things. Design and creative, obviously, like the most important thing really is essentially like copywriting, probably. You can get quite far without really using what you might call UX design or visual design, but eventually you are going to need those skills. You've then got things like more sort of broad design thinking. And then, in development, again, you can get reasonably far without anything. If you're using a WYSIWYG editor and you've got a basic sort of site, but then sort of very quickly you're going to need a front-end developer. Eventually, you might need back-end development of some description. And then alongside that, there's always the whole kind of thing of tagging and then tool implementation and stuff like that. So there's a whole range of skills like that. And any organization thinking seriously about CRO just needs to think, what is our plan for where we get all this stuff in the short, medium, and long term. And, for a large organization, all those things probably exist somewhere. It's just, is there the process and the ability and the license for those things to be utilized where they're needed? So, you may well have skilled digital analysts that sit within some sort of central BI team associated with Adobe Analytics or something like that. And they may not well be, really structurally part of anything to do with their website development, which is a bit weird, but they might not be. But so, if this CRO functional team, whatever it looks like, needs to use kind of advanced digital analytics, then how are they getting that, and like how is that sort of being almost cross-charged and paid for or whatever, or is that structure right? So that's you kind of have to map out like this is the resource that's needed and where it comes from. And again, with that sort of embedded agile model, like, our agile teams are always going to lean on the resources from other areas. You might have a specific user experience design and visual design team. So, how does that work? Like, what's the internal commercials of it? Almost like how do they get time, and how do they secure time from them? You have to think of it almost like designing a little business within a business, and these are the resources we need. And
exactly.
There's like what I'll always advise people is things like you can get quite far just using Fiverr and things like that, freelancers and stuff. So, again, thinking about that map, you got to think, so, well, like, where can we just start to get bits of this resource from externally until such a point when we know we need to hire it internally?
Yeah, exactly. And you can just hire those skills, right? I mean, it's important to have some knowledge build up inside of your company. But execution, you can just, especially in the beginning, you can just outsource.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jonny, thanks so much. Our hour together has flown past.
Yeah, that's come really quick.
I think there's a lot of interesting information. I think it can help a lot of people if they come to a company where Agile is already implemented, that they can just reframe this as maybe it's not a scary new thing that we're trying to do, or it's just trying to do Agile properly.
Yeah,
I think that might help a lot of people in achieving their goals in embedding zero and experimentation.
Yeah,
in Agile. Yeah. So you've been in this working in this field for quite some time now. So one of my final questions for you will be, what's the insight that you think you might have that others in the industry don't have?
So I think that you see that a hell of a lot of people working in CRO, as we call it, have not ever really had the client side experience, and I think traditionally CRO is a kind of a black box thing where like as a consultant or an agency, you would go to a company and say, we'll go away and do this testing for you and come and tell you what works. And I think we're on a tipping point where that is just not going to be what people see CRO as in the future. I think, it ultimately is something that should best sit in-house and should be controlled within the business, because what it is really a way of working around web development and digital innovation. And so, but making that work in a business and the things that you need to change in order to do that is a very specific thing. And having done that, having built that client side, and with all of the consulting work that I used to do as well, I think that's really the sort of thing that I can bring to the table is how do you adapt and structure internally in an organization in order to make it work. And plus that just gives that just gives you a hell of a lot of insight about how to do the day job, I guess, as well in different ways, and how to kind of ultimately make it work. So that's really what a big part of what we sort of say is our USP as an agency, and every single person that works for me is ex-client side in exactly the same way as well. And that's part of how we kind of go out and sell what we do. So
yeah, nice. And my final question for you: who should I invite on the podcast? Who inspires you? Who will be a good guest to share their experience here?
Well, John Crowder, who works for me, is absolutely brilliant in this sort of field, but he's also just a really great personality. So it would be a really interesting person to have on.
And what should we talk about?
I think, well, you'd have to ask him, but I think so. He is on the side in a couple of rock bands and stuff like that. So he just has a lot of.
So he's a proper CRO rock star.
Yeah, I can't imagine he would ever want to call himself that, but yes, he is.
Nice.
So yeah, something around that.
Cool. So if you can introduce us, then we'll connect and see if we can work something out for the podcast.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
No problem.
And talk to you again soon.
Great. Thank you very much.
And this concludes Season 2, Episode 45 of the Zero Cafe podcast with Jonny Longden from Journey Further. Next Monday, I talk with Pep Laya, founder at CXL, and we're going to talk about testing your website copy. Talk to you then, and always be optimizing.